Hello again. So here we meet. I see that some of the colleagues have been able to join us only online, but I have Jukka here in this exact room. So welcome, and welcome Raluca and Edgars. I just get help from the questions, so please send your questions to the workshop as well. We have prepared some questions, of course, for our discussion before, and I should already read from the information available from organizers. We have actually three very different people in this group. Raluca Prună from FISMA is head of Unit 22. She's been dealing with anti-money laundering criminal side for a long time, and also she is a former Minister of Justice of the Republic of Romania. Edgars Pastars is attorney at law. He is legal officer at Finance Latvia and also a former counsel of the President of Latvia. And we have Jukka here, who is data company or actually ethics professor at the same building we are currently in Estonian Business School, and as well he has been teaching lessons in many various universities in Europe and in USA. So we have at least two lawyers, and myself is lawyer as well, and one non-lawyer, the opposite us today in this session. I start the session with the questions to every participant to warm them up, and let's start how it's going, and you're of course welcome in workshop to ask the questions. So Mrs. Prună, it's very nice to see you in online. I know the COVID and in Latvia case the snowing was disturbing you to come here, so I hope the conversation will be still very intensive and hot in a way. So Ms. Raluca Prună, what do you believe in? Are we doing currently better in European Union with fighting money laundering and financing terrorists than we did before? We know in many countries, including all the Baltic states, have been hit a lot by the different money laundering cases. But where are the biggest problem currently located? Where do you believe? Is it the legal issues? Is it not so harsh penalties? What do you think about it?
Good afternoon, everyone, and above all, thank you very much for the pleasure to address this conference in Estonia, and for the pleasure to share this panel with you. I don't believe that a couple of money laundering cases, serious as they were in the Baltics, were the only reason for calling more action at union level. So I think that the introduction that you have done was, if I may, Rainer, provocative. We have indeed many companies that we call under our legislation obliged entities, this being a way to say that they have obligations under the AML-CFT legal framework in the union. And before getting more into content, I would say that at the European Commission, we are much aware that DIC, which is the legal terms that define CFT for customer agents, is not an easy process, and it demands a lot of knowledge, know-how from the obliged entity. Why do we need a new framework at union level? Well, we do need a new framework because so far this the legal framework that we have sits on what we call a minimum harmonization, a directive that has to be transposed by member states, and we thought that for various reasons, not the least the scandals with the banks that we have seen, unfortunately, with banks being closed in the Union, with a direct effect on the reputation of our financial system. But not only because of that, we see merit to move on towards a more harmonized legal framework in which we have rules directly applicable in all member states. We put an end to fragmentation, and more importantly, we ensure that the same rules applies to the same businesses in the same kind of situation. So I would stop here for now.
I read once William Blacksmith, and he was telling that outcomes for fair are much better than outcomes for good, meaning that if companies are afraid of getting penalized, they are too following the regulations than just doing it because it sounds right. So this is always a very play in between of penalties and opportunities. And I guess the next question is, Jukka, to you as well concerning that. So what do you think, why the companies are not doing the KYC or actually trying to do the money laundering? Is it because of they feel the benefits for yourself are higher? Or where is the level in between of obligations to be a good citizen and obligations to receive money for owners? What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I guess my basic perspective is, of course, I'm a professor in business ethics and CSR studies. I'm approaching this issue from that particular perspective. But obviously, I would say the basic story about why firms are participating in these systems has to do with economics, that there are sort of markets for these services, and it might be easy way to make profits by participating in these markets. So it might have to do with this type of situation, that sort of balance between regulatory power and private power is in such a situation that firms have quite a lot of sort of important position in particular economic sector or some area, that actually they are not that worried about those penalties, or they might be so important part of the economy of society that those type of penalties are not so realistic. But what I basically find like an interesting perspective, that because I'm teaching business ethics and CSR, there should also be this type of sort of responsibility in my own area, and I'm a little bit like worried that those type of things that I'm teaching to students could be also used in money laundering, that this type of idea of good ethical image might be interesting in that particular setting, that you have like, I'm a little bit like studying this case of Nordic banks operating in somewhere in between Estonia and Nordic countries, and having a very high sort of ethical image. The home country reputation is high, and these firms are like leading CSR indexes, and so I'm worried about this type of situation where you can basically use CSR and good ethical image in order to launder money. That you have a situation where also your organization might be a little bit like this hypocritical organization, that there is a good sort of outer image, but something different takes place on the shop floor level of the organization. It might easily mean that also criminals could use this type of organizations for their own purposes, that these type of organizations are places where money is washed, it's becoming more clean. And of course, it might be the case that you also use CSR, investing heavily on CSR in order to stay on this particular marketplace, that it's very lucrative in economic sense. So there are obviously many different type of explanations. I guess the basic story has to do with economics and the level of penalties, and whether there is a real threat coming from the side of the regulator. But at the same time, I find interesting this type of idea that also those things that I'm teaching are used in this particular setting, that this type of hypercritical organization is one key aspect of understanding how the logics of money laundering is operating. Because obviously the logic of money laundering is the logic of hypocrisy, that you try to sort of cover something to be in line with the basic sort of norms and standards of your society, but also at the level of the firm, this type of hypocritical organization might be problematic in terms of if you want to fight money laundering seriously.
Just one provocative question. You told about the image of the company could be also the possibility to hide something. Yeah. So, for example, I'm not naming the name of the banks, but I guess we all know about it. So do you believe that that was also a possibility for participating in a money laundering because they had such a high reputation? Because all the banks in Baltic states, they were big banks or bigger banks. So is it something you actually had in mind that you can?
Actually, I have in mind this type of explanation that you are operating with organizations that are nobody is sort of expecting them to participate. They are like might be like a perfect places to.
Like a good citizen.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and of course, there is this type of win-win logics that you probably, with your good ethical image, you could participate in the marketplace and stay in the marketplace, but at the same time, sort of criminals or dirty oligarchs could use your organization in these processes. So there is also risk for these sort of hypocritical organizations that they are taking to be part of the money laundering operations because they basic sort of ethical image is not line with what happens in the level of the shop floor. And of course, this type of hypocritical activity is very important, even when discussing about European level regulation. Sort of normally systems are as strong as the weakest link of the system, and if you have this type of countries or organizations in your system, even though you are raising the bar on the institutional level, it might mean that there's going to be pressure on the level of these organizations, and they are used in money laundering. So it's a sort of tricky question for myself in my own area, how to deal with the fact that if your CSR, if your business ethics is not real in a sense that it's over the board in your whole organization, it easily means that your organization could be used in these type of operations.
Thank you for your answer. Edgars, I'm having a question for you as well. By knowing that you've been preparing legislative exchanges in Latvia and concerning the AML, and we've been with you discussing before a lot about the data exchange issues and possibilities. What do you believe? I was giving a provocative presentation before saying that there is a data protectionism in between of the countries, and that's one of the reasons that we can't freely use the data cross-border and it's not accessible, machine-readable way. What do you think? How can we solve this problem from your point of view? Is it some easy possibility to, or should be legal steps in from the European Union to make it available? What do you think about it?
I think that GDPR sometimes is portrayed as a notorious killer of all data exchange. So if you run out of arguments, you mention GDPR as a last one, but I think it's not the case. That is why it is a regulation, which was drafted to facilitate the data exchange in a safe way and the data that the person's interests are followed. Therefore, when we drafted in Latvia the information exchange arrangements, especially those concerning shared KYC utilities and those to public-private partnerships, then we noticed that still this bias, this stigma that information shall not be exchanged cross-border, it still exists. And I'm looking forward to European Commission that a new ML regulation package, that this won't be the lowest possible harmonization, but information exchange will be addressed. And not only this, just you can do it, or you are entitled to do it, but you should do it. And states should open their databases to oblige entities that they can actually deliver the dream of European Union to have services working cross-border actually, and it includes financial services as well. So if you can't do your KYC, you can't provide financial services meaningfully. And one of the other initiatives I'm very hopeful is it's the ABIS regulation, the amendments proposed by European Commission that might implement this European identity wallets, which might be useful for this as well. But speaking of KYC, you actually don't need much. You need just to verify that the person exists. For example, that I am Edgars and this is my photo. And if someone is like wanting to provide services to me, that I'm the right person, what are my assets? What belongs to me in a nutshell? Income, and of course beneficial owners registries. That's it. Otherwise, you put businesses to look for needle in the haystack, or sometimes even a needle in a stack of needles. So looking forward to new initiatives, but without clear obligations to state institutions, this bias, this stigma is hard to overcome.
Thank you. Raluca, do you have any comments on that? Because you also mentioned the harmonization of need of harmonization, the needs and the rules in European Union countries. I know that the European Commission has been run 2 separate reports showing that it is a lot of different regulations, and sometimes it is just impossible demands for even impossible to fulfill. So could you comment on, Edgars, how far we are currently on the process of harmonizing these processes in European Union?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I would like to go back a bit to the context and explain why we tabled legislation for more harmonization. So we tabled the first regulation in the field of AML CFT. It was not otherwise than that further to our control of how the directive, the 5th AMLD and the 4th AMLD were transposed, and we have seen fragmentation. We've also seen from stakeholders that they told us with regards to CDD, so if you allow me, I would refer to CDD because this is the legal term for KYC. We have seen calls from them, from the obliged entities, that we need to define better what a good CDD is. So what do they need to do to have a reasonable assurance that the process that they're doing to identify the client, to verify his or her identity, to see the source of funds, to see the extent to which the client, I don't know, has other interest features in as a beneficial owner of some companies and so on, to which extent all this can be better done at union level. So what you will see in the proposal that the Commission proposed is a more detailed menu, if you allow me, of what CDD should be. It's not an extensive menu, so it's not a menu a la carte, because here we are in the business of a risk-based approach. So while we have seen merit to move towards more harmonization, more details, a standard, if you want, at union level, it will be still the case for all obliged entities working on the risk-based approach to come with this, even I would not say tacit knowledge, but in their interaction with the client, to define the risk profile of the client, so that to be certain that money laundering, terrorist financing risks are reduced to a minimum. Otherwise, indeed, I fully follow Edgar that this legislation should not be seen in isolation. I beg to differ as to the assertion that there is no cross-border exchange of information. There is a lot of room to improve it, that's certain. We have to take a look as well as EIDAS, the proposal for amending the EIDAS regulation. There are other pieces of legislation at union level facilitating the exchange of information, for instance, between FIUs. And here, without wanting to be too long, I feel also obliged to defend the GDPR, which is not a break. It's not something that is to be taken lightly, but for certain, it will not impede obliged entities, companies, as you have said, Rainer, to do a proper CDD. If a company, if a bank, for instance, needs information from another member state, okay, it's not possible to provide direct access of a private operator of a bank anywhere in the union to publicly held registers. It would infringe fundamental rights. So me as a customer, I would not like a private operator to have direct access in publicly held information. But however, to the extent to which there are suspicions as regards some of my transactions or as regards me as a person, there is already legislation in place allowing such a private actor from the private sector to refer to the financial intelligence unit, which, to the extent to which there is a cross-border element, can contact their counterpart in another member state and check the information. So we should see this in a wider context. And I would close, if you allow me, I would like to reply that the purpose of this legislation is to prevent. And for any other legislation, of course, that we can discuss about the moral grounds of why we respect the law, the higher good, the CSR, but this is not sufficient. And this is why we're having this legislation in place. And without taking too much of the time, indeed, failure to apply correctly this legislation, to put in place internal controls so that we make certain, just to reply to a comment before, that a very ambitious CSR, very high level ethical standards are aligned to the business and the way that the business is done. And if it's not done properly, of course, that there are sanctions in place.
Thank you. I have actually one very, again, provocative question to all of you. What do you believe? Will it be possible that in one day we are in a future, whatever, closer or further, the KYC check are done by artificial intelligence? So not anymore by persons, but we have placed the rules, and this everything is done by checking information, by the computers, by artificial intelligence, and we don't need anymore to involve so many people and asking so much data from a person anymore. So everything is going to be online and happening in life. I don't mean in here surveillance, like for example in some countries in Asia, that all the cameras are checking about the people, but I do believe that at least some automatic KYC is already possible, although we don't know it yet. So comments to everybody. We start with Jukka, as you hear.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about this sort of how these sort of information requirements related to money laundering are connected with something like surveillance capitalism that we are nowadays living. That what are the sort of, whether you could, for example, use this type of information requirements needed for money laundering as one reason to extend operations into our privacy. Sort of, what is the balance between this type of sort of protection of our privacy and what is the balance in terms of how to address these issues of money laundering. Because obviously, it seems to me that banks are complaining about those responsibilities that they have in this area, but at the same time, one could argue that there is possibility for this, that this offers also banks more access to our private data, and that could be used in the setting of the bank, but at the same time resold to other sort of operators, insurance companies or something like that, and economic value is created in that way. So it seems to me that there is this type of balancing. What is the role of the privacy regulation and what is the role of fighting against money laundering, and how they are combined?
I was talking recently with one head of one public organization in Estonia, and he was referring why not the state itself make the KYC check per person, so giving like a street light, like a red, yellow, and green. Because the state has most of the data needed for KYC, and they already assess the data and giving that information, for example, to the banks and applied entities that this person is on risk. So it was provocative, of course, but this as again the matter of artificial intelligence. So it means that somebody is doing without involvement of a person some processes. Edgars, the same question to you. How do you believe? Because I know Latvia is already going. Building up your KYC utility, and how do you believe, is it in one day that KYC is done on the background and giving the street light to the person that is good or bad? Is it possible in the future?
Actually, I think that some of it is happening already now. There are some, especially consumer lending companies or even retail banks, when you're opening just like a simple payments account, and if the bank or this consumer lender has access to public databases, you just enter your basic data. If you have e-signature, it's much more simple. Then you can be onboarded automatically. You can even get an answer in like 50 seconds about whether you're on sanctions list, are you PEP or not. Can you? What's your source of income and how much you actually earn, and do you qualify for the consumer loan, for example, and have you been like, are you on adverse media check? Did you come up positive or negative from this adverse media check? So it's also possible now. And what consumers demand, they demand speed, and businesses need speed. They can't afford to contact FIU and wait for half a year for some response from other country. That's not how it works. The businesses need something fast and tangible. And if speaking of privacy, many people say that the privacy, but the result is that this privacy leads to the fact that this consumer is being refused the service. Because if I don't get information about you, my risk-based approaches to refuse and to enter into business relationship with you. I'm not onboarding you, I'm not opening an account and monitoring you later. So no information, you are not my client. So you can be alone. You can enjoy your privacy. I think that's not right. So we need that the owners of the data are persons. So that's why this idea, what you mentioned, Reinhard, about that the state might do some KYC, I think that it would be good that there would be some like portfolio of basic information, which could be like activated by the data subject himself or herself, and then used for IML check, especially upon onboarding. This would be a great thing to have. And then each obliged entity, depending on their risk appetite, would choose, are they satisfied with what they are seeing or not?
Thank you, Edgars. Actually, I have questions coming from the public to you directly. And you mentioned in your presentation, not presentation, answer, EU citizens identify a wallet. And the question is, how do you think why it's not yet in use? And there is European blockchain single infrastructure initiative. And are you considering to use it at national level?
I think that this question it's a good one. So European Commission has been talking about this for at least 3 or 4 years, and in 2017 when it appeared on European Commission's agenda. So if this wallet would be an integral part of this regulation, so we will have to wait for this, then all member states will be obliged to do this. So I think that this, as a European, I think that would be a good thing for me to use my identity cross-border without those papers and red tape.
Thank you. And the question related to actually all you mentioned about the data protection and the fear of risk of using the data and balancing it between of what is like allowed or not allowed. What do you believe? Will it be wise or considerable to build up some central massive database, European Union level, where all the data connected to the persons for KYC, for example, if you have harmonized some basic needs, when it's possible to build up some database, taking all the data from the states, securing it and issuing to everybody, or is it a bad idea? So actually, Raluca, what do you think about that idea?
Well, I don't want, I'm in a position in which I'm asked to speculate, but I will try to speculate on the basis of legal requirements that we have in the Union. First of all, I think that it's not a very wise idea that the state does the KYC. Me as a citizen, I would not like to have, a fish which is owned by my member state and which can be shared as well elsewhere in Europe. So I think that, the KYC as it is now, and we have to also see this in perspective, because 5 years ago, 7 years ago, everything was, as you said, Rainer, on paper or mainly on paper. And now if there is something good in this pandemic, we have seen that the Financial Action Task Force and also ourselves in the Union, we have advanced to allow online or remote onboarding of customers. This is possible now. It would have been almost science fiction 6-7 years ago. So we should see this in perspective. So just to reply, I think that artificial intelligence now, without prejudging on the discussions that are taking place at Union level, but in relation to CDD, to have this as a process which is done exclusively through the means of artificial intelligence, I think that at this moment is not realistic. And even if I'm allowed, not desirable. It's not realistic because, again, every client has a specific risk profile. And it is not to be foreseen that, only with the use of artificial intelligence, a fair, correct risk profile can be done. And then artificial intelligence, again, it's beyond my competence in the Union, but I'm also a citizen, I read a lot. Algorithms, they can be biased. And what we need to ensure is that, the result of applying a CDD, KYC, only with the use of algorithm may reject some clients, and we will have, unjustified de-risking of clients. So if I'm not a big client, if I don't earn big amount of money, if I'm not, an asset for a bank to onboard me, it's likely to believe that artificial intelligence, if not correctly constructed, I mean, we all know about the biased algorithm in terms of facial recognition, for instance, may de-risk me as a client. And this is something that we don't want to do at Union level. So we don't want to pass on a message that a proper AML-CFT legal framework has not to account for unjustified de-risking of clients. So yeah, I would stop here, but then about the future, nobody can prejudge. I think that we're seeing, again, things are in the move, and the more we advance, the more use of the digitalization we will have.
Just one comment from my side. When studying law a lot of years, many years ago, the dean of my faculty was telling that lawyers' task is to break the economy, because otherwise the economy will go in chaos. Because the lawyers are the one who put the rules and regulations to able economy to drive somewhere. So actually, this is something that's happening in as well, because if not having the lawyers, I guess we would have a lot of different things established and happening in life. But when the lawyers coming and taking everybody down, saying no, there are some rules, there are some data that needs to be protected, the personal rights, the human rights, and so on, so on. Edgars, I have actually the same questions to you as well as I was asking before. So what do you believe in some major massive database, or do you believe still in a system as we are currently, that every country has its own databases, and it will be exchange in between of the countries with data?
I think that both ways might work. The main thing is that obliged entities they would be able to access some database just to verify the basic of the basic before onboarding the client, and especially it concerns those clients who are attracted cross-border and. Without this, there won't be any cross-border meaningful activity for providing financial service. So that it's not even possible. So I would recommend to have anything like this, at least the basic thing that I exist, that I earn more than or less than, and maybe some information on conviction, maybe one or my photo, and that would be it for each obliged entity to have enough information and not to ask it from the client more even than it's necessary. So I think that if I may be blunt here, I think that European Commission hasn't learned anything from tax report which was delivered by European Parliament Committee, which said that criminals exchange information. They have a lot of databases. They are very good with moving money cross-border, but I'm not sure that state institutions are, and the policymakers have understood this, how to fight money laundering, this cross-border element with privacy as an objective, and information exchange is not a priority for state institutions. So that's maybe some harsh position from my side, but that's how I see it.
In big, massive databases, cross-border, universal, when instead of having, that small country, small database build up?
I must say that I'm not an expert in this area, but I somehow feel that sort of very centralized systems are risky ones, and this type of decentralization might sort of alleviate those type of risks. But as I said, I'm not an expert how to handle this issue. But I would see that sort of it might be sort of problems are bigger if you have very centralized system, and it's if there are some vulnerabilities, or is it possible to hack or something like that. So I would prefer this type of more decentralized.
We have discussed in DINNOCAP these issues as well a lot, and understood that centralized databases, this is not only the risk of data loss, because we know that in every time to time in countries happening some data loss cases, but it also makes a lot of vulnerability to cyber attacks, whatever information is needed, because when you have a lot of information gathered in one database, it's very vulnerable, all the risk, and if something happens with the servers, what happens when with the data? So there is a lot of questions, and of course, decentralization is much better, and concerning that the KYC information or anti-money laundering information is very sensitive, and it's always a very high risk to place information openly. I have actually 2 additional questions from public. And one is related to the session before. I'm not sure, did you listen in it before or not? But the question is, the first session, but discussion about digitalization and innovation in SMEs and private sector. So and there was also mentioned that there is a lot of lack of knowledge and experience, and of course the money as well. But do you believe that the companies currently are aware of all the problems and possibilities for getting, for example, money from a government to develop some of the systems or support the programs? Is it a problem that the companies have lack of information how to get help? I don't mean about do they have a problem with not knowing how to do KYC, but maybe to get help and how to develop themselves when just not doing it. Jukka, what do you believe about it?
I must say that I'm not the right person to answer that. I'm not so familiar with this type of topic. Yeah.
But do you believe that digital transformation of the data is something that the companies from the side of business ethics are aware of or not?
Yeah, my experience. I was 1 year at the USA. Of course, this sort of discussion about data capitalism and surveillance capitalism was really sort of hot topic at least at Harvard during that time. And it was my impression was that the world has changed quite a lot. My previous experience from USA was from Stanford University some 7 years ago. During that time, people were like thinking that this digitalization and our digital platforms will change the world to be a better place and the globe will be democratic. But nowadays, the discussion is like really critical, at least in USA, that people are like worried that we have gone too far in a sense that there has been something like not much regulation coming from the government sector. You have had a big tech firms growing over time, and now you are in a situation where the sort of power balance in our societies is changing so that those platforms are providing our basic infrastructure of our society. And how to deal with this type of economic power in our society where we normally think that there should be some sort of inefficiencies if we want to regulate these firms. But now, obviously, these firms are like creating huge amount of economic value. How to deal with that? Somehow in Finland, I haven't really seen this type of discussion so much yet, but I guess it's coming. We are more and more moving into this data capitalism phase of our societies, and how to deal with it in terms of liberal democracy. What are the sort of regulatory frameworks to use in that setting is a sort of very hot topic. But my perspective is a little bit this type of that we are now in a situation where all our basic political categories and also our business ethics is somehow challenged with the fact that our private power is basically providing the infrastructure more and more of our societies, and how to deal with that. So that's the big issue, at least in business school setting.
Fukuyama already said, I think it was already 30 years ago, but the value or the money today is the data. Not anymore the money, so the most valuable thing are the data. And I have a last question, and I'm answering it myself. It's connected to the presentations or the slides or the animation you see before the session started during the break. And the question is related when really will be possible to have some cross-border solutions for KYC, AML, whatever happening in life. And I would like to answer yes, tomorrow open your screen and you can use them, but real life is different because there exist lawyers, as I was telling, who actually break the development of economy. There are different rules, regulations, there is data protections, and there is lack of understanding in between of the countries as well, how to conduct one another thing. So we have still to wait as soon as we have harmonized some of the regulations, as soon as we have established secured measurements and rules how to secure the data transfer. So idea as such is possible, but there is still a lot of to do in the field of legislation in the countries and in between of countries. When it happened, hopefully within a year or two, we can see some of the possibilities in life of having some new developed KYC tools that collecting different information from different countries and exchanging in between of the countries. There are some already available in private sector, but the more are coming in the future because this is a very huge market in money-wise, and it takes a lot of money for companies to do the KYC. So there is interest anyway to develop such kind of system. Thank you to all the panelists. It was very interesting to discuss with you. Have a nice end of the day from that cold, wintry Tallinn, and enjoy seminar tomorrow as well. Thank you.